The morning she realized her hands were shaking from hunger instead of cold. Everything inside her almost broke. The cafe smelled like warmth, roasted beans, and the kind of comfort she hadn't felt in years, but she stood frozen at the counter knowing she didn't belong there. One cup of coffee stood between her and collapse, and even that felt impossibly out of reach. She had no idea that within the next hour, her life would be changed in a way she could never have imagined, by a man who had everything except the one thing she still carried quietly inside her: hope. Before the story unfolds any further, take a moment. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that can change a life, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them most. Emily Carter was 21, a college student in Ohio, juggling 2 part-time jobs, a full course load, and a life that felt heavier with every passing day. Her mother had passed away from cancer 2 years earlier, and her father, already fragile from years of factory work, had followed soon after from a broken heart no doctor could fix. Since then, Emily had been alone, moving from dorm to cheap rentals, carrying her entire life in a single suitcase and an old backpack that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and bus rides. Scholarships covered tuition, but everything else came from sheer endurance. Some days she ate, some days she didn't. That winter morning was especially cruel. Snow clung to the sidewalks, and the wind cut through her thin coat as she walked toward campus. She had been up all night studying for a biology exam, her stomach empty except for tap water and a granola bar she had split in half the night before to make it last. Her vision blurred more than once during her walk, and by the time she reached the small cafe near the library, she knew she wouldn't make it through the exam without something warm. Not food, not comfort, just coffee, something to keep her upright. She stepped inside, heart pounding, already rehearsing the humiliation she feared. The cafe was cozy, filled with soft music and the murmur of people who had time to sit, talk, and breathe. Emily checked her bank balance on her cracked phone screen, hoping for a miracle she already knew wouldn't be there. The number didn't change. She calculated again and again, knowing the cheapest coffee was still more than she had. Standing there, pretending to read the menu, she felt smaller than she ever had in her life. Across the room sat Jonathan Miller, though Emily had no idea who he was. To the world, he was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar technology company, a self-made man who had turned a college dropout story into a business legend. To himself, that morning, he was just a man exhausted by meetings, lawyers, and the hollowness that money never filled. Jonathan was in town visiting a new office branch, escaping his hotel for a quiet place to think. He had lost his wife years earlier to a drunk driver, and success had done nothing to ease the silence that followed him everywhere. He came to cafes like this not for coffee, but to remind himself of normal life. Jonathan noticed Emily not because she was loud or dramatic, but because she was trying so hard not to be seen. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes darting, her hands trembling as she counted invisible numbers in her head. He recognized that look immediately. It was the same look his mother had worn years ago when she pretended not to be hungry so he could eat. A memory he had buried under decades of success surfaced without warning. Emily finally stepped away from the counter, her courage gone. She told herself she didn't need the coffee, that she could push through like she always did, but her body disagreed. As she turned, her knees buckled slightly, and she had to grab the back of a chair to steady herself. The room didn't spin anymore, but the embarrassment burned deeper than hunger ever could. Jonathan stood up without thinking. He didn't rush or make a scene. He simply moved closer, close enough to understand what pride was trying to hide. Emily straightened quickly, forcing a weak smile, already preparing an apology no one had asked for. But Jonathan didn't look at her like she was a problem. He looked at her like she mattered. He asked her to sit, not with authority, but with kindness. Emily hesitated, every instinct telling her to refuse charity, but her body betrayed her again, and she sat. Jonathan ordered coffee and food, not just one cup, but enough to make the table look like abundance. Emily tried to protest, but the words stuck in her throat. She hadn't eaten a real meal in days, and the warmth alone felt like mercy. As Emily ate slowly at first, tears blurred her vision. She hated herself for crying, but exhaustion has a way of pulling truth to the surface. Jonathan didn't ask invasive questions. He listened as she spoke about school, about working nights, about parents who were gone and a future that felt like a cliff edge. Her voice didn't ask for pity. It carried determination even when it trembled. Jonathan saw more than a struggling student. He saw resilience. He saw someone who hadn't given up even when life had taken almost everything. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. For years, he had written checks to charities, signed donations his assistants handled, but this was different. This was personal. This was human. When Emily finished eating, she tried to thank him and leave, afraid to overstay kindness. That was when Jonathan did something no one expected. He spoke with the cafe manager quietly, calmly, the way powerful people do when they know the outcome is already decided. Within minutes, the entire cafe changed hands. Jonathan bought it outright, not as a business move, but as a promise. Emily didn't understand what was happening at first. She thought she had misunderstood, thought exhaustion was playing tricks on her mind. But Jonathan explained that the cafe would remain exactly the same, except for one thing. It would become a place where no student ever had to choose between hunger and dignity again. Free meals, free coffee, no questions asked. And if Emily was willing, he wanted her to manage it while finishing her degree, with a salary that would let her breathe for the first time in years. Emily broke down then, not quietly, not politely. She cried the kind of cry that comes from surviving too long without help. People around them pretended not to stare, but the air was thick with something sacred. Jonathan didn't interrupt. He simply sat there, understanding that sometimes the greatest gift is being seen. In the weeks that followed, Emily's life transformed, not into luxury but into stability. She moved into a small apartment close to campus, bought groceries without counting every dollar, and studied without the constant fog of hunger. She managed the cafe with gratitude and care, greeting students who looked just like she once had, offering warmth without judgment. The cafe became known not just for coffee, but for kindness. Jonathan visited often, sitting in the same corner, watching life unfold. For the first time in years, his success felt meaningful. He funded scholarships quietly, mentored students who reminded him of himself, and allowed joy back into spaces grief had occupied for too long. He never called himself a savior. He called himself grateful. Emily graduated 2 years later with honors. On graduation day, she stood outside the cafe, now a cornerstone of the community, and realized that her life hadn't been saved by money alone. It had been saved by compassion, by someone who chose to notice instead of look away. Just before the ending of this story, we want to ask you something important. Please comment below with the word hope if you believe small acts of kindness can change the world. Your comment helps spread this message further than you might imagine. Near the end of the ceremony, Emily spotted Jonathan in the crowd. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. Gratitude passed between them like a silent prayer. Emily would go on to become a nonprofit director, opening similar cafes across the United States, places where no one was invisible and no one went hungry. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness still exists in a world that often feels cold, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement keeps these stories alive, and somewhere, someone watching might be standing at a counter right now, wondering if hope still exists.